This is the HTC One Touchscreen Digitizer Replacement Guide by Repairs Universe. The recommended tools for performing this repair are a metal pry tool, nylon spudger, a small Phillips screwdriver, a suction cup, and adhesive strips. Before performing this or any other repair, be sure the phone is fully shut off. Remove the SIM card and SIM card tray by inserting a SIM card removal tool or a paper clip and pop the SIM tray out of the phone. Now apply your suction cup towards the top of the screen. Pull on the screen until you have enough gap between the screen and the housing to insert your pry tool for leverage. You will want to work your way from the top of the phone towards the bottom, as the screen is still connected by two flex cables on the motherboard. With the screen now released from the inner housing, the next step will be to remove the back cover from the mid-frame. In this example, we are using a nylon spudger. Because the back metal cover is very strong, considerable force may be needed to initially release the clips holding them together. If you are finding that using a plastic or nylon pry tool is not strong enough, try using a metal pry tool for extra leverage. Take your pry tool and insert it between the mid-frame and back cover. We found a good entry point towards top right of the frame, just above the volume buttons. Once you have enough of your pry tool inserted, work your way around all sides of the housing to release the clips holding the two pieces together until you can remove the back cover entirely. Next, you need to take your small Phillips screwdriver and remove 13 screws. If you look to the right of your screen, you will see we have these screw locations circled in red for your reference. Note that all of these screws are the same size, so you won't need to worry about mixing them up. Place them in a neat pile off to the side for reassembly. You will notice that some of the screws and flex cable connections are covered with tape that you will need to gently peel away to expose them. In most cases, this tape can be peeled back and reused during reassembly. In other cases, you may need to cut the tape in order to expose screws or connections. You will notice here there are two screws holding down this pop connector. With the screws removed, you will be able to gently release the connection using your pry tool or fingernail. Next, release the long black antenna cable running along the right side of the motherboard. Use your pry tool to gently release the antenna connections. There are a few pieces of black tape that you will need to peel away to release the cable. On the right side, we have jawbone connection that will need to be unlatched. Simply lift up on the black tab using your pry tool in order to release the flex cable from the connector. Unlatch the second jawbone connection, then release both flex cables. Next, you will need to disconnect two antenna cables located at the top left of the sister board. You can optionally disconnect them from the motherboard as well for your convenience. Then take your pry tool and lift out the black spacer located above the rear camera. To the right of the motherboard, you will see another small antenna cable you will need to disconnect. Next, you will have a series of flex cables you will need to release from the motherboard. To the right of your screen, you will see a diagram of these connections highlighted for your convenience. Keep in mind that you will have to remove some tape to expose the connections and additional screws. When peeling up the tape covering the battery connection, you will see a second screw you will need to remove to disconnect the battery. Making your way back up to the top right of the device, you will need to release the pop connector on the end of the ribbon cable that bridges the sister board to the motherboard. Note, you may need to peel up additional tape that adheres this bridge cable to the long black flex cable for your screen assembly. When you lift out the bridge connection, you will expose the 13th small Phillips screw you will need to remove. Double check that you have removed all 13 screws before removing the motherboard. Next, using your pry tool, gently lift the motherboard from the top, just beneath the rear camera. Be careful not to bend the motherboard when releasing the adhesive that is securing it to the surface of the battery. Slowly work your way from top to bottom, being careful not to damage any components on the motherboard. With the motherboard removed, you can now remove the battery. From the right-hand side, insert your pry tool between the battery and the housing. Be aware that there is a substantial amount of adhesive securing the battery to the mid-frame. When prying the battery out, you will need to take extreme care not to bend the battery too much, as you could possibly damage it. You will want to apply pressure to the middle of the battery as much as possible to prevent this. If you are replacing the screen assembly only, you do not need to remove the sister board. Replacing other components on the phone may require that the sister board be removed. Before you can remove the sister board, you will need to pop out the vibrate motor from its housing and release one final jawbone connection shown in the figure to your right. If you notice, the silver bracket comes loose from the top of the sister board. Set it off to the side for reassembly. You will now need to peel up the volume button flex cable from the side of the housing. Gently use your pry tool to peel and lift up the ribbon cable and release the adhesive. Using your pry tool, gently pry up from underneath the sister board and free it from the housing. You may also need to help release the front camera from the housing so you don't rip the cable when removing the sister board. You can now replace any necessary components on the sister board or underneath it. Before removing the screen assembly, remember to peel off all of the adhesive tape and bridge connectors so you can easily slide the flex cables through the slots in the housing. Before installing your new screen replacement, check to make sure you can reuse the factory adhesive to ensure a flush fit. You can always apply fresh adhesive strips to the inner housing if you find the factory adhesive may not be tacky enough to secure your new screen. Slide the flex cables through the slots in the housing and press your new screen firmly on all sides, checking to make sure it lines up properly inside the housing. If you remove the sister board, perform the following steps to reinstall it. Before placing the sister board back in the housing, make sure to line up the vibrate motor, audio jack, and front camera to their individual slots on the housing. Reconnect your power button flex cable to the jawbone connector and make sure the power button is secured properly in the slot on the housing. Reapply your volume button flex cable to the side of the housing and double check that the sister board is seated properly to the housing. Reinstall your battery, making sure it adheres firmly to the housing. Next, reinstall your motherboard and line it up properly with the screw locations on the housing. You can now begin to connect all of the flex cable and antenna connections on the motherboard. To the right of your screen, you will see a diagram of the flex cables and antenna connections for your reference. Make sure that when reconnecting the jawbone connections, you press the white tabs down to secure the connection. Always check to make sure there are no flex cables or antenna wires under any of the components you have just installed. As we see here, one of the antenna cables was under the vibrate motor, and we are removing it. We can now continue with the installation of the motherboard. Now reinstall the black spacer at the top of the phone above the camera. After you have checked your connections, you can now begin to install the 13 small Phillips screws in the locations circled in red to the right of your screen. Run the screws down until you feel a light resistance. That's all that's required to secure the motherboard and other components. Now check your connections again and verify that the boards and components are seated in their proper locations. Reinstall the volume button in the back cover. If it fits loosely in its location, a small piece of Scotch tape on the outside will temporarily hold it in position for reassembly. Make sure the power button and headphone jack are in their proper locations. Beginning at the top of the phone, insert the mid-frame assembly at an angle so the power button and headphone jack align properly. Now press the back cover onto the mid-frame assembly, working from the top down. You will hear the clips snap into place. Work all the way around the phone until the back cover is firmly attached to the mid-frame. Reinstall the SIM card tray into the SIM card tray slot. Now turn your phone on to test your repair. If the phone has been disconnected for a long period of time, you may need to charge the battery. Congratulations, your repair has been successful. If you found this video useful, please like it below. Also, subscribe to our channel for more repairs tutorials. Follow us for news, updates, and discounts at our online store. And remember, all of the parts and tools shown in this video can be found at www.repairsuniverse.com.